In this case, we have what is mildly described as a very vulnerable victim.
Two young parents accused of killing their infant son.
Elevated charges of homicide by abuse could be added.
New discoveries from the baby's injuries that could up the stakes for prosecutors, and more shocking details from the investigation that will have you scratching your head. Because one of them is that the boy's mom filmed a TikTok dance, allegedly in the same hospital room as her dying son. A 7-week-old baby boy dies after spending 5 days in the hospital fighting for his life. Just 7 weeks old. And then 3 days after he died, his mom and dad end up behind bars, charged with his murder. This is an ongoing case, and there are a lot of questions in this case that have yet to be answered as this legal process is just unfolding. But what we know so far from this investigation is not just heartbreaking, it is just shocking, including the alleged choices that the young parents made, leading to this tragic situation that's playing out in Pierce County, Washington. So let's get into it. According to a probable cause affidavit from the Lakewood Police Department, quote, on March 5th, 2026, officers responded to Mary Bridge Children's Hospital regarding a child abuse incident. One of the officers spoke to a social worker at the hospital who reported that a 7-week-old infant boy had been transported to the hospital by West Pierce Fire and Rescue for a life-threatening emergency the day before. The social worker stated that the infant, and this boy is only being identified as NC, was admitted to the hospital and was not expected to survive. So, in the police report, the child's parents were identified as 21-year-old Mark Anthony Clammer and 19-year-old Alyssa Vanderbeck, and they were allegedly no longer in the hospital when police got on scene. Now, the injuries that this baby reportedly suffered are horrific to hear. I will warn you of that, and we're going to review those details shortly. But before we do, we need to talk about what happens when the parents of this boy returned to the hospital and police were there. So when the parents get back to the hospital, they're contacted by one of the police officers who, in the report, writes that they found their demeanor to be unusual, considering the gravity of the suspected offense and the condition that their child was in. So that certainly raises some suspicion right there. According to the report, each parent was then interviewed separately on what exactly happened to their newborn, this newborn now fighting for his life in a hospital room. At this point, officers already know that the first 911 call that came in the day before, on March 4th, 2026, around 2:21 in the afternoon. And that's when Clammer, who's the dad, reported that his 2-month-old child wasn't breathing. So here's what Clammer allegedly told police. He reported that he had fed the infant approximately 4 ounces of formula out of his bottle, then another ounce 2 hours later. So everything to that point seems normal, right? And he stated that the infant became fussy during the second feeding. And that also is very typical if you have a 7-week-old child. But this is where things get allegedly dark, because he says that he picked his child up when he was fussy and did that motion, which he demonstrated by making a forward and backward jerking motion. And he reported that he saw the child's head jerk back pretty hard before trying to catch the child's head and pull the infant to his chest. He also later stated that he knew that he had jerked the child in a manner that he realized was rough. Now, when asked what NC looked like after he forcefully picked him up, Clammer replied, quote, he looked normal. I mean, he wasn't crying. I thought he was getting tired. Now, sometime between 1 o'clock in the afternoon at 1:15, Vanderbeck awoke, that's the mom, and she and Clammer took a shower together, according to police, and they had NC, the baby boy, in his bouncer, and they had that bouncer in the bathroom with them. So you're starting to see here some details that would definitely raise suspicion for law enforcement if you were in the room listening to this. Because jerking a 7-week-old baby in a rough motion, just as Clammer allegedly told law enforcement, that doesn't sound like a safe, recommended method when it comes to calming a baby down or keeping a baby safe. Now, we still don't know the full story here because both of these parents were interviewed by police, and the affidavit continues with the mom, Vanderbeck's, point of view of what happened to this point. So, when they get out of the shower, she saw that NC appeared to be breathing abnormally and exhibited some sort of abnormal eye movements that got progressively worse over time. And at one point, she, quote, really forced his eyes open and said that she and Clammer tried to rouse NC by stimulating him physically, which included shaking him in a panic. Again, not something that sounds, and I'm not a doctor, like a recommended method for this situation. Now, when asked if this could have worsened the child's condition, she replied, quote, like he could have had minor shaken baby, and then it got worse. We were so scared. This is a terrifying situation for any parent to be in. And remember, at this point, it is believed that Vanderbeck didn't exactly know why her son was acting the way that he was. But there's a lot more that we need to get to here. Because you do think from, at least her perspective, 1 minute you're taking a shower, then the next minute your newborn appears to be in serious medical distress. And you have these young parents, the pressure they're feeling, I'm sure it's unbearable. And this is what Vanderbeck says happens next. She recorded a video, and she started reaching out to friends and family asking for medical advice. She thought her child might have had a seizure and said that he seemed, quote, distraught with his eyes open, but he was unresponsive. It's important to note that she didn't call 911 at this point. According to police, multiple videos were taken by Vanderbeck of her infant child, and they were very shocking. The videos were filmed in multiple locations in the residence and showed the child in serious distress. According to law enforcement, specifically, the child can be seen with labored breathing, which included posturing and grunting, and this is indicative, according to law enforcement, of the type of breathing that is telling you that something is seriously wrong. The child could also be seen with one eye partially open and the other partially closed. Now, at one point, the child appeared to have stopped breathing. Now, let's break this down for a second, because first, I want to read what Clammer said his response was to seeing his child in this distress. He was believing that it might be gas. Clammer says he attempted to burp the baby approximately for 10 minutes. Clammer explained that his, quote, intuition is usually good, and often when Vanderbeck thinks something may be wrong with NC, Clammer tells her that he will be fine, and he is, but this time Clammer felt it was different when symptoms did not improve. Clammer contacted a triage nurse around 1400 hours and was instructed to call 911, 1400 hours being about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, Clammer said that due to the automated phone system, the triage call lasted approximately 11 minutes, and he called 911 immediately after that call ended. But this is what police say in the report, because based upon their review of Vanderbeck's text messages, videos, and the interviews of Clammer and Vanderbeck, it appears that approximately an hour elapsed between when they first noticed that NC was in significant trouble and when they actually called 911. Now, when you look at Clammer and Vanderbeck's alleged accounts of what happened, it is terrifying to think that they waited a full hour to call emergency services after seeing their infant child in the condition reported there, and not to mention their alleged attempts at trying to get the baby to respond, including more shaking, burping, and forcing the child's eyes open. Now, at this point, the situation, frankly, it's dire, and the baby was subsequently rushed to the hospital in critical condition. And now I want you to remember those police interviews that were done the day after the baby was sent to the hospital. So you fast forward 3 days later, and what's reported by police, it's shocking because investigators also located a video that Vanderbeck, the mom, put on TikTok. This was on March 8th of this year, 2026, where she is seen slowly dancing. According to police, the video, we believe, has been taken down, but it shows her dancing slowly in the bathroom of her baby's hospital room with what can be described as, quote, upbeat music playing in the background. So, according to the affidavit, Vanderbilt published a TikTok dance video in the same hospital room as her dying newborn son. And unfortunately, her son did pass away from his injuries the following day on March 9th. Now, also mentioned in the affidavit are the injuries observed on the child, and those are so hard to talk about. According to the physician's assessment, quote, a 7-week-old with multiple injuries found on imaging, including subdural hemorrhages, anoxic brain injury, extensive retinal hemorrhages, and possible healing rib fractures of the posterior, medial, 8th and 9th ribs identified on CT imaging. Given the lack of any reported accidental trauma and the nature of the injuries, these findings are consistent with an acceleration-deceleration injury with a rotational component with or without impact. Based on the review of the available medical evidence, this presentation is consistent with abusive head trauma.
It's obviously very difficult to hear what just a 7-week-old child was going through, allegedly at the hands of his own parents. And the medical examiner's report from the infant's autopsy on March 10th and 11th is even more tragic.
Because based on the physical observations, including intracranial and spinal hemorrhaging and what appear to be fractures of the 5th and 6th ribs, the tentative cause of death appears to be homicide due to abusive head trauma, though this finding is not definitive until the results of pathology are returned. So right now, the full medical report is still pending from the Pierce County Medical Examiner's Office, but the current information led to the arrests of Clammer on March 9th, the day of his son's passing, and Vanderbeck's arrests following the autopsy that came in on March 11th. So the next day, now Thursday, March 12th, both of them are seen in Pierce County Superior Court for their arraignments. Let's start with the mom, 19-year-old Alyssa Vanderbeck, as she learns her charges and her bail amount. The defendant is charged with 1 count of murder and a separate degree, with the domestic violence special allegation as well as the aggravating factor of vulnerable victim.
We're asking that bail be set in the amount of $1 million. We do believe that the defendant poses a significant flight risk. First, the defendant, as Your Honor is aware that she's charged with the death of her 7-week-old infant child who we believe died by cause of death of abusive head trauma. The full extent of the injuries are unknown, as we have not yet received the full pathology report. There is information to believe that there were multiple ribs within healing stages, and therefore elevated charges of homicide by abuse could be added. In addition to that, we know that the defendant is unemployed. She had little familial support, and that she called the co-defendant from the jail indicating he needed to pay rent and that she may be getting an Airbnb. For all of those reasons, we do believe she poses a significant flight risk, and that significant bail in the amount of $1 million is appropriate.
In this case, we have what is mildly described as a very vulnerable victim. And I don't think that, obviously, we know everything that there is to know at this point. But given all circumstances here, I'm saying bail in the amount of $1 million.
So, according to the prosecutor, Alyssa is charged with second-degree murder with a domestic violence special allegation, along with an aggravating factor of a vulnerable victim, and in this case a newborn. And the judge agreed to set her bail amount at $1 million, which still stands today. As for 21-year-old Mark Clammer, here is how his arraignment went.
The defendant is charged with 2 counts of murder in the 2nd degree with the domestic violence special allegation, as well as the aggravating circumstance of having a vulnerable victim. Your Honor, we're asking for bail in the amount of $1 million, as well as no contact with the co-defendant. The reason being that we believe the defendant poses a significant flight risk. In addition to being unemployed and the evidence that we have little familial support, these charges could be elevated to homicide by abuse pending the pathology report, which indicated that according to previous reports indicating that the victim here had multiple ribs in healing stages, and therefore additional charges to be filed. So for those reasons, we do believe that high
bail at $1 million if appropriate. He is charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder with the same special allegation and aggravating circumstance as Vanderbeck, and the same $1 million bail was set. The prosecutor also mentioned homicide by abuse could be added as an additional charge for both defendants once the full pathology report comes back, and that's based on the healing rib fractures mentioned in the physician's initial assessment. Now, regardless, according to Washington state law, the maximum sentence in a second-degree murder charge is life in prison, so both of these parents could face serious punishment if convicted of these counts. According to each of the court dockets, both parents are due back in court on April 8th. That will be for a pre-trial hearing, and we'll be keeping a close eye on how that plays out and what justice will ultimately look like for that 7-week-old baby who lost his life, a life that should have been just beginning. Joining us now to talk more about this case is Mark Weaver, prosecutor and former Deputy Attorney General for the state of Ohio. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. You know, this story is just hard to find words beyond just saying how brutal it is. We do have some social media posts and some pieces of the affidavit that I did want to go through with what the 2 suspects, the parents, allegedly told authorities. One of them from the affidavit reads that Clemmer, who's the dad, was emotional, tearful at times, and appeared exhausted. He expressed ongoing stress related to finances, housing, unemployment, and exhaustion from childcare, and he stated multiple times that he believed in God and was afraid for his son's life. Then we have some social media posts from the mom, Vanderback. Couple stood out to us. One on January 23rd, the same month that her son was born, she posted saying that she, hates feeling like she's the worst mom to exist. And then on March 3rd, which was a day before the incident allegedly happened, she said, finding a babysitter so me and Mark can both go back to work is going to be hard.